The autumn morning was cold and unwelcoming at the prestigious Manhattan Music Academy. Students rushed through the marble hallways, their expensive instruments tucked under their arms, designer bags hanging from their shoulders. Among them walked a boy who looked nothing like the rest. His name was Marcus, and his clothes were worn thin from years of washing. His shoes had holes that he tried to hide by walking carefully. He carried no instrument, no fancy bag, just a torn notebook and a pencil. Marcus had arrived at this school through a scholarship program for underprivileged children. The academy had accepted him not because they believed in his talent, but because they needed to fill a quota for their funding. Nobody expected anything from him. Nobody even wanted him there. The other students whispered and laughed when he passed by. They called him names, made jokes about his appearance, and treated him like he was invisible. Director Hamilton was a tall man with gray hair and an expensive suit. He had been running the academy for 20 years and believed that only children from wealthy families could truly master music. He thought talent was something you could buy with the right teachers, the right instruments, and the right connections. When he saw Marcus in the hallways, he would shake his head in disapproval. To him, Marcus represented everything wrong with the scholarship program. That morning, Director Hamilton was walking through the corridor with several wealthy parents who were considering enrolling their children. He wanted to impress them, to show them how elite his academy was. The group stopped near the practice rooms, discussing the academy's achievements and famous alumni. That's when Marcus accidentally bumped into one of the parents while trying to squeeze past the crowd. The parent stumbled slightly, and Director Hamilton's face turned red with anger. He grabbed Marcus by the shoulder, his grip tight and painful. The boy looked up with frightened eyes, mumbling an apology. But the director wasn't interested in apologies. He saw an opportunity to demonstrate his authority, to show these wealthy parents that he maintained high standards. Director Hamilton dragged Marcus toward the main concert hall. The wealthy parents followed, curious about what would happen next. Other students began gathering too, sensing drama. Within minutes, a small crowd had formed. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He had no idea what was coming, but he knew it wouldn't be good. The concert hall was magnificent, with red velvet seats and golden decorations on the walls. In the center of the stage sat a beautiful grand piano, its black surface gleaming under the lights. Director Hamilton pushed Marcus toward the stage, forcing him to climb the steps. The boy's legs shook as he stood there, facing the growing audience of students, teachers, and wealthy parents. Director Hamilton's voice boomed through the hall, dripping with sarcasm and contempt. He announced that Marcus was a scholarship student, saying the words like they were something shameful. He told everyone that Marcus claimed to love music but couldn't even afford proper clothes or an instrument. The crowd laughed, and Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes, though he refused to let them fall. The director walked across the stage with slow, deliberate steps, enjoying every moment of humiliation he was inflicting on the boy. He gestured toward the grand piano with a theatrical sweep of his arm, then turned to face the audience with a cruel smile. His voice carried throughout the hall, loud enough for everyone to hear every word clearly. He spoke about how some people didn't belong in places of excellence, how they dragged down the standards that others worked so hard to maintain. He said that talent required breeding, education, and resources that certain people simply didn't possess. Marcus stood frozen, his hands trembling at his sides, unable to move or speak. The other students in the audience whispered and giggled, some recording the moment on their phones. Then Director Hamilton made his declaration, the words that would change everything. He pointed at the piano and then gestured toward his own knees. He said that if this poor scholarship boy could actually play the piano, if he could produce anything worth listening to, then he himself would kneel right there on the stage in front of everyone. The audience erupted in laughter. Several students clapped and cheered, thinking it was the funniest thing they had ever heard. The wealthy parents smiled, nodding in approval at how the director maintained discipline and standards. Teachers stood along the walls, some looking uncomfortable but saying nothing. Nobody believed for a second that Marcus could play. They all assumed he had never touched a piano in his life. Why would a boy from the streets know anything about classical music? The director crossed his arms, his smile wide and confident. Marcus looked at the piano, then at the laughing crowd, then back at the piano. His whole body was shaking now, but something was shifting inside him. Years of mockery, years of being told he wasn't good enough, years of being invisible were all gathering into a single point of determination. His mother's voice echoed in his memory, telling him that he was special, that he had a gift, that someday the world would see what she saw. The boy took a deep breath and walked slowly toward the piano bench. The laughter in the audience grew louder. Some students shouted jokes, others made sounds imitating terrible music. Director Hamilton stood at the side of the stage, arms still crossed, that arrogant smile never leaving his face. He truly believed this would be the perfect lesson, the moment that would prove his point about maintaining standards. Marcus sat down on the bench and adjusted his position. His hands hovered over the keys for a moment. The ivory was cool under his fingertips. He closed his eyes, blocking out the cruel faces, the mocking laughter, the expensive clothes, the judgment. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he found the only place he had ever felt truly safe, the only place where he belonged. He thought about the old piano in the community center where he had spent every free moment since he was 5 years old. That piano had broken keys and scratched wood, nothing like this beautiful instrument, but it had been his sanctuary. An elderly janitor named Mr. Peterson had taught him everything, spending hours after work showing him how to read music, how to feel the rhythm, how to let emotion flow through his fingers. Marcus's fingers touched the keys, and the first note rang out across the concert hall. It was soft, almost hesitant, and the audience laughed even louder. Someone shouted that he couldn't even press a key properly. Another student yelled that he should give up and go back to where he came from. Director Hamilton chuckled, shaking his head as if watching a predictable comedy unfold. But then the second note came, and the third, and suddenly something shifted in the air. The notes began flowing together, forming a melody that seemed to wrap around everyone in the room. Marcus's fingers moved with increasing confidence, dancing across the keys with a grace that seemed impossible for someone so young, someone so untrained in their eyes. The laughter began to fade, replaced by confused silence. The piece Marcus had chosen was Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, one of the most beautiful and technically challenging pieces in classical piano repertoire. It required not just technical skill but deep emotional understanding. As Marcus played, his whole body swayed gently with the music. His fingers knew exactly where to go, how much pressure to apply, when to hold back and when to let the emotion flood through. The melody filled every corner of the concert hall, rising and falling like waves on an ocean. It spoke of loneliness and hope, of darkness and light, of pain and beauty intertwined. The students who had been laughing moments before now sat in stunned silence. Their phones hung forgotten in their hands. Some of them felt chills running down their spines, though they couldn't explain why. Director Hamilton's smile had vanished. His arms slowly uncrossed and fell to his sides. He took a step forward, squinting at the boy as if seeing him for the first time. This couldn't be happening. This poor child, this scholarship case, this nobody wasn't supposed to have talent. He wasn't supposed to make the piano sing like that. The director's jaw tightened, his mind racing to make sense of what his ears were telling him. The wealthy parents who had been chuckling earlier now leaned forward in their seats, captivated. One mother placed her hand over her heart, feeling it ache with the emotion pouring from the piano. A father who had played piano himself as a child recognized the difficulty of what this boy was accomplishing. The teachers along the walls exchanged glances of shock and confusion. Marcus played on, lost in the music. Tears finally escaped his closed eyes and rolled down his cheeks, but they weren't tears of shame anymore. They were tears of release, of finally being able to show the world who he really was. Every note carried years of pain, every chord held dreams that he had been forced to keep hidden. The piano wasn't just an instrument under his hands, it was his voice, finally allowed to speak. The piece moved into its most complex section, where the left hand and right hand seemed to have completely different conversations that somehow harmonized perfectly. Marcus's fingers flew across the keys with breathtaking speed and precision. Not a single note was missed, not a single moment of timing was off. It was the performance of someone who had lived with this music for years, who had practiced until their fingers bled, who had found in music the home they couldn't find anywhere else. As the nocturne reached its emotional peak, something extraordinary happened in that concert hall. Students who had never cried over music found tears streaming down their faces. A girl in the front row who had mocked Marcus's shoes earlier was sobbing openly, her expensive makeup running in black streams. A boy who had called him names in the hallway sat with his mouth open, completely transformed by what he was hearing. The music swelled and softened, breathing like a living thing. Marcus's hands moved with the confidence of a master, yet there was something raw and honest in his playing that even professional pianists often lost. He wasn't performing to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He was simply pouring his soul into the keys, sharing the only language in which he could truly express himself. Director Hamilton felt his legs growing weak. His confident posture had crumbled, replaced by a hunched, defensive stance. He wanted to look away, to leave the stage, to be anywhere but here, witnessing his own cruel words coming back to haunt him. But he couldn't move. The music held him captive, forced him to confront what he had become, what he had done to this innocent child. The wealthy parents were no longer thinking about enrolling their children. They were thinking about the boy on stage, wondering how someone so young could carry so much depth, so much pain, so much beauty inside them. One father whispered to his wife that in 40 years of attending concerts, he had never heard anything like this. She nodded, unable to speak through her tears. Marcus's playing moved into the final section of the nocturne, where the melody returns but softer, more resigned, like someone accepting their fate while still holding on to hope. His fingers pressed the keys with gentle reverence now, each note a prayer, each chord a wish sent into the universe. The entire hall seemed to be holding its breath, afraid that any sound might shatter this perfect moment. The last notes hung in the air like morning mist, slowly fading into silence. Marcus held his hands above the keys for a moment longer, then slowly lowered them to his lap. He opened his eyes and looked down at his worn shoes, suddenly aware again of where he was, of the people watching him. The magic of the music disappeared, replaced by the cold reality of the concert hall. For several seconds, there was absolute silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Then, from the back of the hall, a single person began to clap. It was one of the older teachers, a woman who had been teaching piano for 30 years. Her applause was joined by another, then another. Within moments, the entire hall erupted in thunderous applause. Students jumped to their feet, clapping until their hands hurt. Parents stood and applauded, some still wiping tears from their eyes. Marcus looked up in shock, unable to process what was happening. He had expected more mockery, more laughter, more pain. Instead, he was receiving something he had never experienced in his life: genuine appreciation, respect, recognition. His hands began to shake again, but this time it was from the overwhelming emotion of being truly seen for the first time. Director Hamilton stood frozen at the side of the stage, his face pale as death. The applause surrounded him like an accusation. Every clap was a reminder of his cruelty, every cheer a condemnation of his prejudice. He looked at Marcus, then at the standing crowd, then back at Marcus. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The students who had laughed the loudest were now clapping the hardest, as if trying to erase their earlier behavior. Some looked ashamed, avoiding eye contact with each other. Others seemed genuinely moved, transformed by the power of what they had witnessed. A few were recording the moment on their phones again, but this time to capture something beautiful rather than something to mock. Marcus slowly stood up from the piano bench, his legs wobbling beneath him. He didn't know what to do with his hands. He had never received applause before, never stood on a stage while people celebrated him. Part of him wanted to run away, to escape back into his familiar invisibility. But another part, a deeper part, knew that something fundamental had changed in this moment. The applause continued for what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes. Finally, it began to fade, and an expectant silence fell over the hall. Everyone turned to look at Director Hamilton. The boy looked at him too, remembering the words that had been spoken just minutes earlier. The promise that had been made. The wager that everyone had assumed was a joke. Director Hamilton's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, disbelief, embarrassment, and finally resignation. He knew what he had to do. Every person in that hall knew what he had to do. There was no way to avoid it, no clever excuse that would work, no escape from the words he had spoken so confidently. His reputation, his authority, everything depended on whether he would honor his promise. The director took a deep breath and stepped forward onto the stage. His expensive leather shoes clicked against the wooden floor, each step feeling like a mile. The silence in the hall was so complete that everyone could hear his breathing, could see the sweat forming on his forehead. He stopped a few feet from Marcus, and for a moment, their eyes met. In that look, Marcus saw fear and hatred, but also something else, recognition. The director was being forced to see Marcus as a real person, as someone with value, as someone who could do something he himself could never do. It was a bitter pill for a man who had spent his entire career believing that worth could be measured by wealth and status. Director Hamilton's knees slowly began to bend. The movement was stiff and reluctant, every inch a battle against his pride. The audience watched in absolute silence, hardly believing what they were seeing. The most powerful man in the academy, the man who decided futures with a signature, the man who had never shown weakness or humility, was about to kneel before a poor scholarship student. His knees touched the stage floor with a soft thud that echoed through the silent hall. Director Hamilton knelt there, his head bowed, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. The position lasted only a few seconds, but for him it felt like an eternity. For Marcus, watching this powerful man humbled before him, it felt unreal, like a dream that might shatter at any moment. Then Hamilton stood up quickly, his face burning red with humiliation. Without looking at Marcus or the audience, he turned and walked off the stage with rapid steps. His footsteps echoed through the hall as he disappeared through the side exit. The door slammed behind him, and then there was silence again. No one knew what to say or do. The moment felt too big, too important, too strange to process. Finally, the elderly teacher who had started the applause walked onto the stage. Her name was Mrs. Richardson, and she had been teaching at the academy since before Hamilton became director. She had seen countless talented students over the years, but something about Marcus's playing had touched her deeply. She approached the boy with gentle steps and placed a hand on his shoulder. Mrs. Richardson turned to address the crowd, her voice clear and strong despite her age. She said that what they had just witnessed was the truest form of talent, the kind that comes from deep within the soul, the kind that no amount of money could buy or create. She said that Marcus had reminded all of them why music existed, not as a status symbol or a trophy for wealthy families, but as a language of human emotion and connection. The students listened to her words with unusual attention. Some of them felt ashamed of how they had treated Marcus, how they had judged him based on his clothes and his background. Others were simply amazed, their understanding of what talent meant completely transformed. The wealthy parents whispered among themselves, several of them asking who this boy was and how he had learned to play like that. Mrs. Richardson told Marcus to follow her, and she led him off the stage through a different exit than the one Director Hamilton had used. They walked through quiet corridors until they reached her small office. She offered him a chair and a glass of water. Marcus drank it gratefully, his hands still shaking, his mind still trying to catch up with everything that had happened. She asked him about his training, about where he had learned to play. Marcus told her about Mr. Peterson, the janitor at the community center, who had been a professional pianist before an injury ended his career. He told her about the broken piano in the basement where he practiced every day after school, sometimes until the center closed at night. He told her about teaching himself to read music from library books, about listening to recordings on an old radio. Mrs. Richardson listened with tears in her eyes. She told Marcus that what he had was rare, precious, and powerful. She said that Director Hamilton had been wrong, that the academy needed students like him more than he needed the academy. She promised that she would make sure he received proper training, proper instruments, and proper respect. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt like someone truly understood him. The news of what happened in the concert hall spread through the academy like wildfire. By lunchtime, every student, every teacher, every staff member knew the story. Some versions were exaggerated, some were accurate, but all of them centered on the same incredible truth: the poor scholarship kid had humiliated Director Hamilton with the most beautiful piano performance anyone had ever heard. Marcus walked through the hallways that afternoon expecting the usual mockery and avoidance, but instead he found something completely different. Students stopped and stared, but not with contempt anymore. Some smiled at him. Others nodded with respect. A few brave ones even said hello. It was strange and uncomfortable in a new way. Marcus had learned to be invisible, but he didn't know how to be visible. In the cafeteria, something unprecedented happened. As Marcus stood with his tray, looking for an empty corner where he could eat alone as usual, a group of students called out to him. They were some of the most popular kids in school, the ones with the expensive clothes and famous parents. They were inviting him to sit with them. Marcus hesitated, suspecting a cruel joke, but their faces seemed genuine. He walked over slowly and sat down. The conversation was awkward at first. The other students asked him questions about his playing, about his life, about where he learned music. Marcus answered quietly, still not trusting this sudden change. But as they talked, he realized that something real was happening. These students were genuinely curious, genuinely impressed. Some of them apologized for how they had treated him before. Others admitted they had never really seen him as a person until now. Meanwhile, in his office, Director Hamilton sat alone in the dark. He had cancelled all his meetings for the day. His secretary had knocked several times, but he told her to go away. He stared at his desk, at the awards and photos on his walls, at the evidence of his successful career. But none of it meant anything anymore. He had been humiliated by a child, and worse, he had been wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. Hamilton's phone kept buzzing with messages and calls. Board members wanted to know what happened. Parents were asking questions. Teachers were requesting meetings. He ignored them all. His mind kept replaying that moment when his knees touched the floor, when he had to bow before someone he had considered worthless. The memory burned in his chest like acid. But beneath the humiliation and anger, something else was stirring. A small voice in the back of his mind that he had been ignoring for years was finally speaking loud enough to be heard. It was asking him uncomfortable questions. How many talented children had he overlooked because they didn't come from wealthy families? How many dreams had he crushed with his prejudice? How many times had he been wrong while being so certain he was right? Back at the cafeteria, Marcus was experiencing something he had never felt before: friendship. The students around him were laughing, joking, including him in their conversations. One girl asked if he would teach her some techniques. A boy invited him to a practice session. Another student offered to share his expensive music books. It was overwhelming and wonderful and terrifying all at once. As days passed, Marcus's life at the academy transformed completely. Mrs. Richardson became his mentor, giving him private lessons 3 times a week. She introduced him to advanced techniques, helped him refine his natural talent with proper training, and opened doors to opportunities he had never imagined existed. She arranged for him to practice on the best pianos in the school, instruments that cost more than his mother earned in several years. Other teachers began to notice Marcus too. His history teacher discovered he had a sharp mind and a deep curiosity about the world. His literature teacher found that he wrote with the same emotional depth that he played piano. Slowly, Marcus was being seen as a complete person, not just a scholarship case or a piano prodigy, but a young man with multiple talents and worth. The students who had once mocked him now competed for his attention. Some of this was genuine friendship, but Marcus was wise enough to recognize that some of it was also about being associated with someone famous. Videos of his performance had been recorded on phones and shared on social media. Within a week, clips of him playing had gone viral. People around the world were watching the poor boy humiliate the arrogant director and were moved by his beautiful playing. Interview requests poured into the academy. Local news stations wanted to feature Marcus's story. A major television network was interested in doing a special feature. Concert halls were offering him opportunities to perform. It was all happening so fast that Marcus felt dizzy. Just 2 weeks ago, he had been invisible. Now the whole world seemed to want a piece of him. But fame brought complications. Some students became jealous of the attention Marcus was receiving. They spread rumors, trying to tear him down. They claimed he had professional training that he was hiding, that his poor background was an act, that he had somehow cheated or fooled everyone. Marcus tried to ignore these whispers, but they hurt. He realized that no matter what he did, some people would never accept him. His mother was both proud and worried. She worked long hours as a cleaner in office buildings, and suddenly reporters were showing up at their small apartment asking for interviews. She was protective of her son, afraid that all this attention might harm him or change him. She had raised him to be humble and kind, and she feared that sudden fame might corrupt those values. Director Hamilton remained in his office most days, dealing with paperwork and avoiding people. The board of directors had held a meeting about the incident. Some wanted him fired for his cruel treatment of a student. Others defended him, saying he had technically kept his promise by kneeling. The decision was postponed pending further investigation, leaving Hamilton in a state of uncertain limbo. Late one evening, Hamilton found himself walking through the empty halls of the academy. His footsteps echoed in the silence. He passed practice rooms where dedicated students spent hours perfecting their craft. He remembered when he had been young and passionate about music too, before ambition and politics had taken over, before he had started measuring people's worth by their bank accounts. Hamilton found himself standing outside the main concert hall. The doors were unlocked, and he pushed them open quietly. The stage was lit by a single spotlight, and there, sitting at the grand piano, was Marcus. The boy was playing softly, practicing a new piece. He hadn't noticed the director enter. Hamilton stood in the shadows at the back of the hall, listening. The music was different from the Chopin Nocturne. This piece was lighter, more hopeful, like spring rain after a long winter. Marcus's fingers moved with the same grace and confidence, but there was something new in his playing now. There was joy. The scared, broken boy who had stood on that stage weeks ago had found something he had been missing his entire life: belief in himself. Hamilton felt tears forming in his eyes. He was not a man who cried. He had built his entire identity around being strong, authoritative, unshakable. But standing there in the darkness, listening to this music, something inside him finally broke open. He saw himself clearly for the first time in decades, and what he saw was not pleasant. He had become exactly the kind of person he would have hated as a young, idealistic music student. The music stopped. Marcus lifted his hands from the keys and sat in silence for a moment. Then he spoke without turning around. He said he knew someone was there, that he could feel their presence. Hamilton froze, unsure whether to reveal himself or leave quietly. But something made him step forward into the light. Marcus turned on the bench and saw the director. His expression was guarded, cautious, but not afraid. The power dynamic had shifted between them. Hamilton was no longer the intimidating authority figure. He was just a man who had been wrong, who had been cruel, who had been humbled. He walked slowly down the aisle toward the stage, each step feeling heavier than the last. Hamilton stopped at the edge of the stage and looked up at Marcus. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then the director did something he rarely did: he apologized. His voice was rough, unfamiliar with the words. He said he had been wrong about Marcus, wrong about talent, wrong about what mattered in music and in life. He said there was no excuse for how he had treated the boy, for the humiliation he had tried to inflict. Marcus listened without interrupting. His face remained neutral, processing the words. Hamilton continued, explaining that he had spent 20 years running this academy based on false beliefs, that he had probably hurt countless students, that he had lost sight of why music existed in the first place. He said that watching Marcus play had reminded him of something he had forgotten, that true talent comes from the soul, not from privilege. The boy finally spoke. His voice was quiet but steady. He asked Hamilton why he had become so cruel, so focused on money and status. The director was surprised by the question. He expected anger or triumph, not genuine curiosity. He thought about it for a moment, then admitted something he had never told anyone: he had come from poverty too. Hamilton climbed onto the stage and sat on the edge, his expensive shoes dangling above the floor. He told Marcus his story, something he had hidden for decades. He had grown up in a trailer park, the son of an alcoholic father and a mother who worked 3 jobs. Music had been his escape, his salvation. He had clawed his way into a music program through pure determination and a scholarship. But the experience had changed him in ways he didn't recognize at the time. The wealthy students had mocked him mercilessly. Teachers had treated him like he didn't belong. He had to work twice as hard as everyone else just to be considered half as good. The constant rejection and humiliation had planted seeds of bitterness in his heart. When he finally achieved success, instead of helping others like him, he had joined the people who had once hurt him. He had convinced himself that his suffering had been necessary, that only those who could endure such trials deserved success. He had forgotten what it felt like to be the poor kid, the outsider, the one everyone underestimated. Seeing Marcus stand on that stage had forced him to remember, and the memory was painful. It showed him what he had become, the very person he had once feared and hated. Marcus listened to all of this with a mixture of emotions. Part of him felt compassion for the young boy Hamilton had been. Another part was angry that someone who had suffered would then inflict that same suffering on others. He asked Hamilton why he didn't break the cycle, why he chose to become like his tormentors instead of being different. The question hit Hamilton like a physical blow. He had no good answer. He mumbled something about survival, about fitting in, about protecting himself. But even as he spoke the words, he knew they were excuses. The truth was simpler and uglier: he had been a coward. When given the choice between challenging an unjust system and benefiting from it, he had chosen personal gain over integrity. Marcus stood up from the piano bench and walked to where Hamilton sat. He looked down at the director, this powerful man who suddenly seemed small and tired. The boy said something that surprised both of them: he forgave him. Not because what Hamilton did was okay, but because holding on to anger would poison his own heart. He said he wouldn't let Hamilton's cruelty turn him into a cruel person too. Hamilton looked up with genuine shock. He had expected hatred, demands for his resignation, revenge. Instead, this boy he had tried to humiliate was offering him grace. Tears flowed freely down the director's face now. He thanked Marcus, his voice breaking. He said he didn't deserve forgiveness, but he would spend the rest of his career trying to earn it. The two of them sat in the concert hall talking for hours that night. Hamilton shared stories about the Academy's history, about talented students who had been overlooked because of prejudice. Marcus talked about his dreams, his fears, his hopes for the future. They found an unexpected connection in their shared experiences of being outsiders, even though they had responded to that experience in completely opposite ways. The next morning, Director Hamilton called an emergency assembly for the entire Academy. Students and teachers gathered in the concert hall, curious and nervous about what would be announced. Rumors had been spreading about Hamilton's possible resignation, about major changes coming to the school. Marcus sat in the audience, as unsure as everyone else about what was about to happen. Hamilton walked onto the stage looking different than usual. His suit was less perfect, his posture less rigid. He looked like a man who had been through something difficult and had emerged changed. He stood at the microphone and began to speak, his voice clear but humble. He admitted that he had been wrong about many things, that he had run the Academy with prejudice and favoritism. He talked about the scholarship program, which he had previously treated as a necessary burden. He announced that it would be expanded significantly. The Academy would actively seek out talented students from underprivileged backgrounds and provide them with full support, not just financial aid but also mentoring, instruments, and opportunities. The focus would shift from how much money a family had to how much passion and dedication a student possessed. Some of the wealthy parents in attendance looked uncomfortable. They had chosen this academy partly because it was exclusive, because not everyone could get in. Hamilton addressed their concerns directly. He explained that excellence and diversity were not opposites, that the academy would become stronger by opening its doors wider, that their own children would benefit from learning alongside people from different backgrounds. He announced the creation of a new scholarship fund named after Marcus. The Marcus Johnson Scholarship would specifically support students who showed exceptional musical talent but lacked financial resources. Hamilton pledged a significant portion of his own salary to establish the fund and challenged other wealthy donors to contribute. Several hands went up immediately. Marcus sat in shock, hearing his name echoed through the hall in a positive context for once. Students around him clapped and cheered. Some turned to look at him with genuine admiration. He felt overwhelmed by the sudden responsibility of having a scholarship named after him. He was just a kid who played piano. How had his life changed so dramatically in just a few weeks? Hamilton then did something even more surprising. He announced that he would be stepping down as director at the end of the academic year. He said he needed to make way for leadership that truly understood the Academy's new direction. He recommended that Mrs. Richardson be appointed as his replacement. The announcement was met with enthusiastic applause from students and teachers alike. After the assembly ended, students surrounded Marcus with questions and congratulations. He was uncomfortable with all the attention but handled it with grace. Several students who had been his worst tormentors approached him privately to apologize. Some of these apologies were sincere, others seemed motivated by guilt or social pressure, but Marcus accepted them all. He understood that people could change, just as Hamilton had shown him. Life at the Academy settled into a new rhythm over the following months. True to his word, Hamilton began implementing changes immediately. The admissions process was reformed to focus on talent auditions rather than financial backgrounds. New practice rooms were open to scholarship students who had previously been restricted to the oldest, worst-maintained spaces. The atmosphere of the entire school began to shift. Marcus found himself in an unexpected role as a symbol and spokesperson for the new direction. He was invited to meet with potential donors, to speak at events, to represent the Academy in various capacities. It was exhausting and sometimes uncomfortable, but he understood the importance of it. If his story could help other kids like him get opportunities, then the discomfort was worth it. His relationship with Hamilton remained complicated. The director worked hard to prove his sincerity, often asking Marcus for advice on policy changes, seeking his perspective on how to make the Academy more welcoming. They would never be close friends, the wound of that first humiliation too deep to fully heal, but they developed a mutual respect. Marcus saw Hamilton genuinely trying to become a better person, and that meant something. Mrs. Richardson took Marcus under her wing completely. She connected him with professional musicians, arranged for him to attend master classes, and helped him prepare for various competitions. Under her guidance, Marcus's already impressive skills grew exponentially. He learned to play pieces by Rachmaninoff, Beethoven, and Liszt that he had only dreamed of attempting before. In the spring, Marcus was invited to perform at a prestigious concert series in the city. It would be his first major public performance outside of the Academy. The news caused excitement throughout the school. Students who were now his friends offered to attend and support him. Even some teachers who had previously ignored him expressed interest in coming to watch. The night of the concert arrived with Marcus feeling more nervous than he had felt standing on that stage months ago. This time it wasn't about proving himself or defending his dignity. This time, people had expectations. They had seen the viral videos, heard the stories, and were coming to see if the legend matched reality. The pressure was immense. Backstage, Marcus paced in circles, his hands trembling. His mother was there, wearing her best dress, beaming with pride despite her own nervousness. Mr. Peterson, the elderly janitor who had first taught him to play, had been given a place of honor in the front row. Mrs. Richardson checked on him repeatedly, offering encouragement and advice. Even Hamilton had come, sitting quietly in the back, wanting to witness this moment. When it was time to go on stage, Marcus walked out to thunderous applause. The concert hall was packed, every seat filled. He saw familiar faces from the Academy scattered throughout the audience. He saw strangers who had come just because they had heard about the poor boy who could make a piano sing. He sat at the beautiful grand piano, took a deep breath, and placed his hands on the keys. Marcus began with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, third movement. It was a bold choice, technically demanding and emotionally complex. His fingers flew across the keys with fierce intensity, attacking the rapid passages with precision while maintaining the underlying emotional current. The audience sat mesmerized, hardly breathing as they watched this young boy command the instrument with such authority. He moved through his prepared program, each piece showcasing different aspects of his talent. There was the delicate beauty of Debussy's Clair de Lune, the passionate intensity of Chopin's Ballade No. 1, and the technical wizardry of Liszt's Hungarian Rhapsody No. 2. With each piece, Marcus transported the audience to different emotional landscapes, proving that his viral performance had not been a fluke but a glimpse of genuine, exceptional talent. During the intermission, the buzz in the lobby was electric. Critics who had come with skepticism found themselves re-evaluating their assumptions. Music professors discussed the technical aspects of his playing with genuine excitement. Wealthy patrons whispered about potential sponsorships. Marcus's mother cried happy tears as strangers approached her to say how talented her son was. The second half of the program was even more powerful than the first. Marcus had saved the Chopin Nocturne, the piece he had played that fateful day at the Academy, for his final performance. When he announced it to the audience, explaining briefly what this piece meant to him, you could hear people shifting in their seats with anticipation. They had seen the videos, but they wanted to experience it live. As Marcus played the Nocturne, the same magic that had transformed the Academy's concert hall filled this larger venue. The melody seemed to wrap around every person in the audience, touching something deep and universal in the human experience. People who had come to judge his technique found themselves forgetting to analyze, simply experiencing the pure emotion of the music. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of stunned silence, and then the entire hall erupted. People leapt to their feet, applauding wildly. Some were crying openly. Others simply stood with their hands pressed to their hearts, too moved for words. The ovation lasted for several minutes, and Marcus had to bow repeatedly as the applause refused to die down. Backstage after the performance, Marcus was overwhelmed with people wanting to talk to him. Record label executives presented business cards. Concert promoters pitched ideas for tours. Music schools offered full scholarships for advanced studies. His mother tried to protect him from the chaos, but it was too much, too fast. Mrs. Richardson eventually had to intervene and clear the room, giving Marcus space to breathe. Later that night, sitting in a quiet corner with his mother and Mrs. Richardson, Marcus finally allowed himself to feel the full weight of what had happened. He had proven to the world what he had always known in his heart, that he belonged on that stage, that his poverty didn't define his worth, that talent and dedication could overcome any obstacle. His mother held him as he cried tears of relief and joy. The success of the concert opened doors that Marcus had never imagined existed. Within weeks, he was invited to perform at venues across the country. Major orchestras wanted to collaborate with him. Music conservatories competed to offer him their most prestigious programs. The boy who had once been invisible was now in demand everywhere. But fame came with challenges that Marcus wasn't prepared for. The constant attention was exhausting. People recognized him on the street, in stores, everywhere he went. Some wanted autographs, others wanted photos, and some just wanted to tell him their own stories of overcoming adversity. He appreciated their kindness but missed the simplicity of being anonymous. School became complicated too. While many students were genuinely happy for his success, others grew resentful. They felt he received special treatment, that his fame had gone to his head, that he was no longer one of them. Marcus tried to remain humble and approachable, but the distance grew. Fame had created a barrier between him and the normal teenage experience he craved. His friendship with Mr. Peterson remained a constant source of comfort. The elderly janitor was proud but not surprised by Marcus's success. He had always known the boy had something special. They still met regularly at the community center, and Marcus would play on that old broken piano that had been his first teacher. Those moments, away from the spotlight and expectations, helped him stay grounded. Hamilton, true to his word, stepped down as director at the end of the academic year. Mrs. Richardson took over, and the Academy underwent remarkable transformation. The scholarship program expanded dramatically, bringing in dozens of talented students from backgrounds similar to Marcus's. The culture of exclusivity and snobbery began to fade, replaced by a genuine community of musicians who respected talent regardless of its origin. On Hamilton's last day, Marcus went to his office. The former director was packing his belongings, preparing to leave the academy that had been his life for 2 decades. The office looked bare and sad without all the awards and photos. Hamilton seemed smaller somehow, humbled by his fall from power but also more at peace than Marcus had ever seen him. They talked for a long time that afternoon. Hamilton shared his plans for the future. He was going to work with inner-city music programs, using his connections and resources to help kids who reminded him of his younger self, and of Marcus. He said he wanted to spend his remaining years trying to undo some of the damage he had caused, to be the mentor he wished he had found when he was young. Marcus told Hamilton something he had been thinking about for months. He said that what happened that day in the concert hall, as painful as it was, had ultimately been good for both of them. It had forced Hamilton to confront his prejudices and change his life's direction. It had given Marcus confidence and opportunities he might never have received otherwise. Sometimes, he said, the most difficult moments lead to the most important transformations. Years passed, and Marcus's career blossomed in ways that exceeded everyone's expectations. He performed at Carnegie Hall, played with renowned orchestras, and recorded albums that received critical acclaim. But he never forgot where he came from or the struggle that had brought him to prominence. He used his platform to advocate for music education in underprivileged communities, speaking passionately about how access to arts could transform lives. The Marcus Johnson Scholarship at the Academy grew beyond anyone's initial dreams. Funded by donations from people inspired by his story, it supported not just one or two students but dozens each year. These students came from homeless shelters, foster care, immigrant families, and rural poverty. They brought diverse perspectives and experiences that enriched the Academy's culture and challenged its remaining prejudices. Hamilton kept his promise too. He worked tirelessly with community music programs, using his administrative skills and connections to secure funding, instruments, and opportunities for young musicians. He was no longer the arrogant director who measured worth by wealth. He became known as a fierce advocate for underprivileged children, someone who understood their struggles intimately and fought to remove the barriers they faced. Marcus never forgot Mr. Peterson. When the elderly janitor's health began to fail, Marcus made sure he received the best medical care available. He dedicated his first major concert recording to his first teacher, crediting him in the liner notes as the man who had seen potential where others saw nothing. Mr. Peterson lived to see his student become world famous, passing away peacefully with the knowledge that his kindness had changed a life and, through that life, touched the world. The community center where Marcus had spent countless hours practicing underwent major renovations, funded by a donation from Marcus himself. The broken piano that had been his training ground was restored and placed in a place of honor. A plaque beside it told the story of a poor boy who had practiced there every day, dreaming of a future that seemed impossible. The center became a pilgrimage site for young musicians, a reminder that greatness could emerge from anywhere. Mrs. Richardson remained Marcus's mentor and friend throughout his career. She attended his major performances, offered advice on difficult career decisions, and celebrated his successes as if they were her own. In interviews, Marcus always credited her with helping him develop his raw talent into refined artistry. She had believed in him when belief was scarce, and he never took that for granted. The Academy under Mrs. Richardson's leadership became known nationally as a model for inclusive excellence. Other prestigious institutions studied its programs, trying to replicate the balance it achieved between maintaining high standards and opening doors to diverse talent. The waiting list for admission grew, with both wealthy families and scholarship applicants eager to be part of this transformed community. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful day in the concert hall, the Academy organized a special commemoration. Marcus returned to perform, bringing his career full circle. He stood on the same stage where he had been humiliated and where he had proven his worth. The hall was filled with current students, many of them scholarship recipients who had been inspired by his story. Before he played, Marcus spoke to the audience about his journey. He talked about being the scared, poor kid who was mocked and dismissed. He spoke about the moment when he almost gave up, when the cruelty seemed too much to bear. He described how music had saved him, how one performance had changed his life and the lives of countless others. He reminded everyone that talent exists everywhere, in every economic class, every background, every corner of society, but only when given opportunity could it shine. Then Marcus played. He chose the same Chopin nocturne that had started everything, but his playing had evolved. It carried all the emotion of that first performance but also the wisdom of experience, The depth of understanding that comes from living through triumph and struggle. Every note seemed to tell the story of his journey, from invisibility to recognition, from humiliation to respect, from doubt to certainty. The music filled the concert hall one more time, wrapping the audience in its beauty. Students cried, teachers felt chills, and in the back of the hall, an elderly man who had once been a proud, arrogant director sat with tears streaming down his face, grateful for the hard lesson that had helped him find his humanity again. When the final note faded, the applause was thunderous, but Marcus barely heard it. He was looking at the piano bench where a scared boy had once sat, gathering courage to show the world who he really was. That boy had been brave enough to play despite the mockery, honest enough to let his soul speak through music, and strong enough to forgive those who had hurt him. That boy had changed everything, not just for himself but for hundreds of others who would follow in his footsteps. Marcus stood and bowed to the audience, but in his heart, he was bowing to that younger version of himself, thanking him for not giving up, for believing in the power of music when nothing else seemed reliable, for proving that talent, dedication, and heart could overcome any obstacle. The story that had begun with cruel laughter had ended with transformation, redemption, and hope for all those who would dare to dream despite their circumstances.